Tonight, staff and partners will provide updates on long-term financial strategy, the 2026 ballot measure polling results, where we will be looking for feedback from council on which ballot measures you would like staff to proceed in development of ballot language for the November 2026 ballot. So with that introduction, I'll turn this over to Adam Probolsky with Probolsky Research to talk about the 2026 ballot measure polling results.
Thank you, Krista. It's been a great opportunity to work with staff for I think the third year now. We really appreciate the opportunity. I'll put some context around this. You are not alone, and you did nothing wrong to the fact that you need resources. And it's not my job to validate you all, but it's just the reality that we're seeing in communities all over the country. So the work we're talking about tonight is happening in hundreds of other places right now to figure out if they can correct an imbalance. And if you remember, we've done this a couple times before in 2023 and 2025, help you identify opportunities at the ballot and understand what your voters are thinking. I'll share the presentation, and this is an executive version of that. Still 20 some odd slides, but I'll move quickly and certainly interrupt, or I'll be available for questions after. Very typical poll of voters, and in fact, likely voters. So there's a test we put on it. People who we expect to turn out. It's the work that pollsters do to estimate who we think is going to show up, and that's who this poll was taken from among. English and Spanish, you had 1% of your respondents choose Spanish, but still give us more accurate because that small percentage had the chance to respond in the way they wanted to. Multi-mode, people talk to us on the telephone, online, really came on board in the way that they typically communicate. And so, giving you some first numbers, we asked them what types of infrastructure would you like the city to increase funding for? And we gave them a prescribed list, let them choose up to 3. And you can see rec centers does come to the top, doesn't quite meet a majority, but it's pretty significantly stands out. And all the other items on there obviously have some, voters have some connection to each of those other items, but certainly rec centers come to the top. We give them the opportunity to reduce funds for something. And in this case, again, a prescribed list, but we took away anything they chose in the first one. And you can see most, or the plurality choose say nothing. I don't want to reduce funding for anything, but there's a couple things that pop there at the top, but not of any substance percentage-wise of your voters. We put a question in front of them that we see as important and is something we typically see results like this. We give them the idea that if we delay funding now, we're just going to see higher costs later. And this is something we fundamentally know, but we'd like to validate that the voters understand this. And they do. They're all their own little mini economists. They get the answers here of the fact that if we spend money today, it's a better value. We also asked them, do you think the city needs more resources? And in this case, we start to get a little more to the closer to home, right? They start thinking, okay, wait a second, what are you going to ask me for, I think? So yes, you have a plurality say they agree, but you still have a significant group of people who say they disagree because they don't know what's coming next. And we then ask them a couple different ballot questions. This is a split sample, so half your voters in the survey got this question. There's a B side. This one is a $200 million maximum scenario of an increase in debt. It's a bond, and it has obviously a lot of details in there. This is what it looks like on the ballot. Unfortunately, it's a lot of words. And you can see there is not support for this construct of a bond measure. When we look at it with 400 million and we have a different construct, there's more specific items laid out here, easier to see. You do have a plurality say they're voting yes in this B scenario. Now, keep in mind that the 200 million people didn't see the 400 and vice versa, but these numbers we would expect to play out broadly. So you do have greater support for 400 million than 200 million, maybe counterintuitive, but it's largely, I think, because we give a much more prescribed understanding of what we would put those resources towards, but still not a majority. We then give some messages because we want to understand what part of this is important to people and what information you might want to share with them along the way. One message is that the bond could increase property taxes by 3.352 mils. We give them some details on what that would look like for their property. Now, you have 28% that say they're more likely to vote yes. You have about 40% say they're more likely to vote no. This does not mean we don't get a majority saying no. It's not a big number, but it's still a net negative among the people who are voting on this or how they respond to this message. We also talk to them about the bond could fund recreation centers, give residents of all ages the opportunity to exercise, meaningful social interactions, what you could give them with improved recreation centers. And that 47% are more likely to vote yes based upon this. But again, it doesn't rise to majority, it doesn't rise to big numbers. And you can see among the people who said, no, I'm not supportive, you get about 15% more likely to vote yes. And you have about on the unsure, you do get most of them to come on board when you start to give more detail here. So it is a net positive message that you might want to talk about. Aging population and the fact that West Age Well Senior Center, we get specifics here. North Boulder Recreation Center, here's where we're going to put some resources. Net positive, but again, it's not that big of a motivation for people to be voting yes. You could replace and renovate fire stations and help sustain fire emergency services and wildfires. This gets us to a majority. When you talk about the funding these things, a majority of people say, yes, I'm more likely to vote yes on this bond based upon this allocation or potential allocation. And you can see among the unsure, really a massive number come on board. Similarly, you're going to take care of essential services. If you don't have these resources, we may not be able to really go into all these different things and be successful at rec centers and fire stations and civic buildings, if we don't have these resources. So that really does motivate people to be a little bit more supportive, a majority. And here you can see the laid out messages. This is your cheat sheet. We share what someone might say in the public or what you might say somewhere and what the response might be from your public. So messages that are majority yes and some that are not so moving to people. We then retest after we talk through those different things, and you can see that numbers are pretty similar. They're still in this case, it gets to a little bit bigger of a no vote on the 200 million. On the 400 million, the numbers move a little bit, and we're still in the plurality yes, but not really in any significant way. Not a lot of movement here. We then go to another possibility, and that is a permanent park and recreation tax increase. And this would yield $7.5 million annually. And we give some details about what that would look like. And we have a plurality voting no on this. Even with all these details, it's just not what they're looking for. So I'll move to the next one where we talk about a message that this could essentially, it would cost about $86 on a $1 million property. And they're actually not terribly moved off from it. They're actually almost surprised, I think, by the fact that it's not that much money. So their plurality more supportive, but it doesn't really move people significantly. We then go to our most popular effort here, and that is a vacancy tax. And you would yield about 6 million off of that. And we give them some explanation of it. And this again is proxy ballot language, but really just explains the concept of what this would do. It's on unoccupied homes and second homes and things like that. And you have pretty strong majority support for this kind of a tax. Of course, most people in town will not be paying this tax, or almost no one will. So it's an easy one for them to be supportive of. Still 30% voting no, but big majority voting yes. We tell them specifically here that this is really just on those second, third homeowners, people who have a place to come land for a couple of weeks a year. That really is a motivational factor. Now they really understand what we're talking about, and 70% are more likely to vote yes, knowing that. It's a strong factor for them. We test another opportunity for new revenue, and this is general fund debt. So really not a new tax, but just the opportunity for you to go into greater debt from the city hall and find those resources internally to pay that back. Plurality voting yes. I think this is a hard one to really explain and understand because it's not so easy to understand where the revenues are coming from, but you have plurality support for it. And so this would be a possibility because you're more differential, 33% no, 44% yes. We then present them with some scenarios, right? What if we just had the rec and safety bond and the general fund debt? Where would you support it? And you can see more support for the bond, but really nothing that gets you to a majority if you had all those opportunities to choose. We then give them kind of everything lined up. and say, what would you support? And we still, even with all those possibilities, pulling at different emotions, 55% say they are going to support the vacancy tax. So this is a pretty solid number. I think you have a very good chance if that was on the ballot, if that was a policy decision, you would likely have success there, as long as you did the outreach to explain what was going to happen and really communicated with your voters. And we wanted to gut check the concept of what Krista was saying, and just in general, the idea of, regardless of whether you support or oppose renewing or increasing taxes, do you believe that there's this gap, like this is happening and there's this differential? And yes, they absolutely understand that you have a situation that you have fewer revenues than you need to fulfill the services you need to, and they recognize that. You're on a strong footing there. It's not something you have to really explain terribly to the voters. Just quickly, again, likely voters, not your residents, not even the voters. It's a tighter, much different group of people. So not as diverse as your community overall, because these are the people we expect to show up. A lot of words there, sorry, so I'll stop and certainly give it back to staff and be available.
Dean, quick question. Would you like, and maybe Mayor, would you like questions about the poll currently before we go into the rest, or do we want the whole presentation?
We might as well ask Adam questions about the poll now, since you just gave that presentation. Adam, thanks for that.